Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be with you. I'm up in North Bay at the moment. And in this virtual space, I'd like to thank you for joining us. We will be providing, as Alexandra said, a quick refresh on the Brisc sessions to help you get grounded again. We will also be examining how we can deliver Brisc virtually and in person. We also will be looking at the impacts of COVID and how excited we are to be seeing our students again. I don't know about you, but it's so fun to be back in the halls. So let's start by breaking down session one. If it's virtual care, before you start your session, be sure to follow all of the established protocols in your board for virtual care, such as confirming consent, the limitations of technology, duty to report, ensuring confidentiality. Whatever your standards are within your board, it's important to pay attention to that. It's also important to get a sense, if you're doing virtual, where the student is and who may be nearby should assistance be needed. Are you prepared if you're meeting in person? Do you have all your papers in front of you? I know that was difficult for me, moving papers around in the beginning. Make sure you're ready to go and remind yourself, you got this. Can I get the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So if we're looking at the core assumptions, let's just quickly revisit those. We start by engaging our students, asking about their immediate concerns, what is really on their mind. We want to assess the nature of those needs and then empower them through teaching basic tools that they might need for coping and resiliency. You may want to ask more questions about what the experience has been like in yet another lockdown. How are they feeling about returning to school? How has the return to school been? The assessment needs to be driven by what the student wants help with in the moment, focused on what they do have control over. This may be the opportunity to introduce any strength-based observations, and such as you still managed to get some credits even when we had to shift to online. What are your concerns about being back to school? These engaging discussions will inform the next planning steps. We've been quite surprised, and I'm sure you have, by the resiliency of some of our students. We also know that our vulnerable students have become even more vulnerable. So it's important to look for those survival and resiliency skills so we can build upon those. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that Brisc is not designed to be a comprehensive approach. The Brisc focuses on the here and now and the student's concerns in the present. With Brisc, we can determine quickly through the assessment what additional supports are required. That's why Brisc is considered a step care model and is the place to start to deepen our understanding of the student's challenges. The pathways and options when Brisc is completed should include a variety of service options both within the board and within the community. Next slide, please. So if we look at the key skills in session one, remember, first you're going to use those exceptional engagement skills that you have and include the student in determining the focus of care. Then you're going to move to assessment and gathering information using standardized assessments and the informal what's up conversation that looks at school, peer, and family. Then you will be generating a problem list to identify the current problems, and then you narrow that down to the top three. Then you move to introducing a new skill to the student, which is informal monitoring. So I hope you remember all of these things. Coming back to you, I'm sure. Next slide, please. So let's look at those components. To revisit, we set an agenda. We elicit concerns using those standardized assessments and the informal conversation that then we generate that problem list. We identify the top three problems, and then we propose to work together with your grade engagement skills, and then we introduce informal monitoring. So that's how the structure goes. All the time, of course, you're conveying hope that you will be able to help that student. Next slide, please. So why an agenda? Outlining the amount of time is very important, not only in virtual, but in face-to-face. In virtual, your connections to the session may have time limits that can't be exceeded. It is important to set the parameters for the student so they will know what to expect. It's a very transparent process. You want to model collaboration and time management. Setting an agenda allows you to compose yourself and take a breath. You can demonstrate how to break down huge problems into very workable goals. That's what we're trying to achieve here. If you should get, it also should get you past that crisis of the day mentality and get more quickly to those areas of concern that could be a crisis. The structure helps keep it goal focused. So how do we do this? Once again, this is done very informally. So just to give you an idea, I am hoping during these conversations, you can share your concerns and worries, and we can work together to develop a game plan to address the problems you've identified. You may want to normalize any of their concerns, validate their feelings, and be as transparent and upfront about what the next steps will be and what will happen in their next session. Next slide, please. So there's two types of assessments we use in Brisc: standardized assessment and individual assessments. The standardized assessments might be new to some of you, but you may be very experienced with these, but they have established clinical norms that compare them to students their own age. We use the PHQ-9 for mood and depression, and the GAD-7 to measure anxiety. These are two standardized scales. We do want to explain to the student that the instrument allows us to gauge their progress over time, and that it allows the student to be compared to others their own age. Individual assessment is different in that it tracks an individual progress over time and helps us gauge the progress that we're making, almost like a ruler. How far are we getting there? The informal monitoring also gives you a good baseline of where the student is at. The stress ratings are very individualized to the student and to the problem they identified and can be tracked over the course of service. Remember, this is not a general stress rating, but directly related to the problem. Next slide, please. So remember, when you are doing the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, make this quite casual. It's expected part of the process. Please don't call it a test. That will not get you very far. There are many ways to do this. You can give the student directly. You can give this to the student directly. You can read it to them if you think their literacy is low. Be clear to be neutral in this process. Once you've completed, you will be adding the scores from 1 to 9 in the PHQ-9. Remember not to add in 10, because that's like a weighting. If question 9 is endorsed, remember this, folks, you need to spend more time on this because it is a question about suicidal thoughts. You will need to activate your board's protocols for assessing safety and risk and safety planning. We don't leave that. We're going to go right to that. We have seen a rise in suicide risk assessment as a result of COVID. So it's important to address this right away if it comes up. If you are having this conversation, you are taking note of any themes or anything that jumps out to you that you may want to highlight for the student. So as you're having this conversation, what themes are emerging? So you're wanting to pay close attention to that process. You want to make sure to reflect back the results, because no one wants to do a test without hearing what happened in that. And you might say something like, your scores are consistent. If you see this one, they're fairly low. Your scores are consistent with someone who's in the mild range. And does that sound right to you? And be sure then to validate their experience. Next slide, please. I just want to remind you before we leave the assessments, these are not diagnostic tools, but this comes up often. We are not diagnosing. This is just our way to start that conversation, that therapeutic conversation, and understand their needs in a deeper way. The getting to know you part, the what's up. As you move further into the assessment, you want to get as much as their story as you can. So, what's it been like for you? If it applies, you want to check in if they've been impacted by any issues related to racial inequities. And given all the latest movements and turmoil, very important to do a check-in on that. You want to begin that what's up conversation with how they're currently getting along. Ask about their transition back. Have they reconnected with their peers? What has home been like? We should also inquire about any substance use, because we know that has increased over this time period. As well, we know students are struggling with some eating disorders right now, or disordered eating. Let them tell their story without too many probing questions and just stick to clarification. We want to touch on what is important, but step away from that traditional collection of family history. Remember, you already know a lot about that student, or you should, or you can get access to some of the information. Most importantly, find out if they've had any outlets for fun. Have they been engaged in any activities that bring them joy, that social network? And what have they been missing out on? We know clubs and sports and everything's been kind of halted, and now they're starting up again. I know our athletes are in much better shape. Next slide, please. When you're creating a problem list, remember, this is more like a brainstorming exercise, and you're just getting their ideas. Clarifying questions will be important, as so many things about their life may have changed. There might be new routines now. Let them generate the problems and resist the urge to make your own suggestions. That one's hard sometimes. If this becomes a difficult process, you can reflect back on the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, and you can pull out any themes that emerged. Resist the urge to delve into problems just yet. Turn your attention to some of the problems if they come out large. Be specific about what part of that problem is causing them the most difficulty and what part is under their control, given many things are beyond their control at this point in time. Next slide, please. This should move fairly smoothly into identifying the top 3 problems once you've got that list. So from the list, you can work to see what their top concerns are, and you want to let them lead this process. Framing the problem in a way that you can select the aspect of the problem that the youth can work on and tackle within the next 2 weeks. The problem list may need to be adjusted in future sessions because guess what? Things happen. Okay, next slide, please. This is an easy one. You're going to propose working together. And this is something you do all the time. So you want to instill hope the whole time that this is something you can help them with and you've helped other students. We used to call this contracting in the old days, but this is really establishing that working agreement that you're going to be doing with the student. It should be very brief. It should validate what they've been experiencing. And you would propose to work together for 2 or 3 more sessions in whatever format the student requests, whether that's online or it's face-to-face. You would want to honor that request. Assure you will be addressing the identified problem and that together you have some useful skills you want to teach them, and together they can determine what else might be needed. Next slide, please. The last aspect of session 1 is the informal monitoring. This is very important because it is the start of the skill teaching and an intentional strategy for behavior change by just taking notice. Be very clear on what and how they will be monitoring to ensure success. Have a wholesome discussion on various ways to track, emphasizing what they learn will help decide what to do next. Remember, the monitoring target does not have to be the problem, that problem that was chosen. We are teaching a skill and is also a strategy to bring awareness to their current behavior. The more clear you can be, the better the results will be. Well, folks, that's really the end of sort of collapsing session 1. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie now to look at session 2. Over to you, Katie.